Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world. So today, we're diving into Pierce Brown's sci-fi epic, Golden Sun, and we're going to use it as a powerful model for understanding how elite competition really works inside a closed system.
Here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we have to define the system itself, the pyramid. Then we'll look at the incentives driving everyone's behavior. After that, we'll trace the totally predictable outcomes and ask how a system this chaotic manages to stick around. And finally, we'll see how this fictional world actually mirrors our own.
All right, part one, the system. To really get a grip on the conflict, you first have to understand the box it all happens in. And in this case, that's the rigid social hierarchy they call the society. So what is the society? Well, at its core, it's this massive pyramid of genetically engineered human castes. Each color is literally designed for one job. You got pinks for pleasure, grays for war, reds for mining, and way up at the top, you have the golds. They rule everything and everyone. But here's the kicker. They don't just rule peacefully. They're locked in this constant, brutal fight with each other for ultimate control.
And this brings us to the most important metaphor for this whole analysis. I want you to think of this hierarchy as a pressure chamber. It is a completely closed system that is designed to force the gold elite into fighting each other forever. This isn't a bug in the system, it's the entire point. The constant war is supposed to forge the absolute strongest and most ruthless leaders.
Now, what's so fascinating here is that this is how the golds justify it all to themselves. This quote from one of their leaders, Arch-Governor Augustus, it frames their brutal rule not as tyranny, but as something completely necessary. In their minds, they're not oppressors. They're the saviors who brought order to chaos. They're the harsh medicine humanity had to swallow to survive.
Okay, so let's move on to part two. We've got the system defined. So what are the rules of the game? What actually drives the behavior of every single gold playing for keeps?
The logic is actually brutally simple. First, status isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn through winning, usually in a battle. Because of that, any alliance you make is purely about what you can get out of it. They're completely transactional. So war isn't some terrible breakdown of the system, it's a feature, a selection process that weeds out the weak. It all boils down to this: your reputation and your raw power are the only things keeping you alive.
And this, right here, this is the mantra that is hammered into every gold from the moment they are born. It's not just some catchy phrase, it's the fundamental operating system of their entire world. It justifies every single betrayal, every act of violence. Because if you lose, well, you just weren't strong enough or smart enough to begin with.
Okay, part three, the outcomes. So what happens when you build a pressure chamber and you fill it with people who believe only the strong survive? Well, the results are incredibly violent, but they're also completely predictable. This system creates this inevitable cycle. You can see it mapped out right here. It all starts with that constant hunger for more power. That makes loyalty just a tool, which means betrayal isn't just common, it's a normalized strategy for getting ahead. So to protect themselves, golds consolidate power within their own families, which then turns personal rivalries into huge dynastic conflicts that eventually just explode into full-blown civil war. This observation from Darrow, the protagonist, just nails it. The system doesn't collapse because of some threat from the outside. The golds shatter against each other because of what they are. The very system that made them also demands that they destroy one another. Part 4. Persistence. And this brings up a huge question, right? If the top of the pyramid is just this constant meat grinder of betrayal and war, why doesn't the entire structure just crumble? How does it survive?
Well, the system is actually pretty clever. It holds together using a two-part trick. First, all that chaos is contained. The backstabbing, the wars, it's all directed inward, between the golds themselves. They're fighting over who gets to run the system, not questioning the system itself. And second, the lower colors are just completely locked out of this game. Their loyalty is ensured through patronage. Their survival literally depends on their gold master winning.
And what all this creates is a profound crisis in perception. The golds genuinely believe they are the noble guardians of humanity, the saviors. They are almost completely blind to the fact that their entire world, their power, is built on the violent exclusion of everybody else.
And here's the proof of how they manage that perception. They use propaganda. Whenever their internal power struggles spill out into the open, they immediately reframe the narrative for everyone else.
It's never gold fighting gold for more power. No, it's pitched as the entire unified society fighting some common enemy, like these so-called red terrorists. It's all a performance meant to keep the lower colors in line.
So, for our last section, let's bring it all home. The real power of analyzing a story like Golden Sun is that it gives us a new lens to see our own world. So where can we spot these same patterns playing out?
You know, once you see the pattern, you start to recognize it in a lot of places. Think about dynastic political families where power feels like a birthright passed from one generation to the next. Or look at the cutthroat world of unregulated corporate competition, where it's a zero-sum game at the top. You can even see it in the logic of institutionalized war economies, where a state of constant, contained conflict actually becomes profitable, even necessary, for the system to keep running, no matter the human cost.
And that leaves us with a pretty big question. Golden Sun makes a really compelling argument that when you have elites competing in a closed system, is escalating chaos just inevitable? That's a question definitely worth asking about the systems we all live in today.
Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a longer, audio-based analysis of this topic, see the deep dive linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.